The anime starts by showing us a beautiful, futuristic city where we see a pink-haired girl running away from something that clearly wants her very dead. Out of nowhere, someone contacts her and asks if she managed to get the key. She says yes, like it was no big deal. But right after that, some robots show up and open fire with their turrets, hitting her in the leg. Of course, she's not out yet. She activates some kind of invisibility power, turns into a stealth ninja, and escapes. Later on, she reaches the exit and hands the key to a tiny robot that was waiting for her like a loyal puppy. Just when it feels like the coast is clear, surprise! One of the robots chasing her earlier shows up again, ready to finish the job. Right before things go full Terminator, a giant mecha comes crashing in and blocks the attack. Turns out it's on her side. Plot armor wins again. She gets a chance to run, but the evil robot launches a few missiles at her, lands a solid hit, and she ends up falling off a bridge, badly hurt. Cut to a new scene where we meet our protagonist, Shu Uma, casually on a train headed to school, like he didn't just wake up in the middle of a sci-fi war zone. His best friend shows up to greet him, and while they're chatting, Shu notices a suspicious amount of military out on the streets. She explains that apparently there was a terrorist attack the night before, and that's why the whole city center looks like a war zone. Later, Shu arrives at his high school and gives us a nice little world-building monologue. 10 years ago, a virus caused a massive pandemic in Japan, which absolutely wrecked the country. It got so bad that other nations had to step in to help, and ever since then, Japan's been kind of dependent on outside support to keep things running. After school, Shu heads to what looks like an abandoned house in a restricted area of the city. Inside, he finds the pink-haired girl again and is obviously shocked. Not every day you run into the girl from earlier chases and explosions. The moment she sees him, she panics, and her robot goes full bouncer mode, knocking Shu flat on the ground. This heroic dive ruins his lunch, and the girl tries to hide, but then her stomach growls, loudly. Girl's starving. So Shu, being a decent dude, offers her some food. While they eat, he realizes he recognizes her. Turns out, she's not just some random fugitive, she's Inori, a famous singer from a well-known band, because of course she is. She asks Shu to take her robot to a specific place in the city. While showing him a cute little string craft she made, yes, arts and crafts in the middle of all this, a group of soldiers suddenly bursts in. She tries to run, but gets grabbed, and for no reason other than anime drama, they beat her up on the spot. Shu tries to stop them by shouting, "Hey, quit it!" But they calmly explain that she's a terrorist suspect, and then aim their guns at him. Naturally, he panics and hides like a champ. They drag Inori away, and Shu is left there, feeling like absolute garbage for doing nothing. The robot then shows him a map, pointing to the place Inori wanted him to go. So, feeling guilty and maybe a little heroic, he decides to take the robot there. Meanwhile, Inori is being interrogated about the key's location. When she refuses to talk, the military sends out more troops to find it. Shu finally arrives at the spot the robot pointed out, only to get jumped by a bunch of thugs trying to steal it. They beat him up a bit, but he refuses to hand it over, and just when things look grim, a blonde guy named Guy appears with backup. Yes, Guy, just Guy. He and his crew wreck the thugs in under 10 seconds. One of the girls takes the robot, and Guy casually asks what happened to the pink-haired girl. Before anyone can answer, a massive explosion rocks the area, and one of Guy's guys runs up to say, yeah, the military's here. Cut to pure chaos. Military troops are mowing down everyone in sight like it's just another Tuesday. A mecha rolls in, and Guy tells Shu to protect the key and go save Inori. Meanwhile, Inori's being held in a trailer that flipped over after getting hit by a mecha missile, because of course. She manages to escape, but just as she's about to get away, a group of mechas surround her. They aim their weapons, ready to fire, and surprise again, Shu shows up out of nowhere and dives in to save her. At that moment, the key activates and unlocks a glowing, absurdly cool sword that was apparently inside Inori this whole time. Don't ask questions. Anime logic. Shu grabs it, blocks missiles like a pro, and with one anime swing of that blade, completely obliterates the enemy mechas. Just your average high school day. When the military sees the power of the weapon, they completely freak out and send even more robots to take down the protagonist. Meanwhile, he defends himself as best he can, but after blowing up a few incoming missiles, the blast sends him flying straight into a building. Guy, who's been watching the chaos like it's pay-per-view, finally decides to step in and drops a nearby building on the enemy mecha, trapping it. This gives the protagonist the opening he needs to destroy it with the sword, and then he runs off to help Inori. After that, the sword casually returns into Inori's body, as if that's a normal thing, and with Guy's help, they manage to escape. In the next scene, we see Guy's allied mecha, piloted by a girl, getting absolutely wrecked by another enemy robot. The one piloting this new mecha is Yan, the son of a high-ranking military officer, because nothing says qualified like being born into it. Yan shows up to meet with the squad that's hunting Inori and casually tells them he's joining the mission, but he'll do things his own way because his dad runs the show. The other soldiers basically nod and pretend they're cool with it. Later on, we see the protagonist, Guy, and Inori on top of a building. Guy scolds Inori for failing to bring him the key, and just when things get tense, the protagonist defends her, saying she did the best she could. Guy isn't impressed. He explains that the real problem was giving the key's power to the wrong person, meaning the protagonist. That's when we learn the key is actually called the Void Genome, a super powerful biological weapon, and it was originally meant for Guy all along. He explains that there are only 3 Void genomes in existence, and the one the protagonist used gives him the power of the king. Basically, it lets him pull out the hidden power inside other people and turn it into a weapon, like when Inori's sword appeared out of nowhere. After the little lecture, Guy tells the protagonist he's now part of the rebellion, whether he likes it or not. Then, one of Guy's people brings urgent news. A building has been taken over by Yan's forces, and more than 100 people are being held hostage. Guy immediately calls the entire resistance for a meeting, and they quickly come up with a plan to storm the building and rescue the hostages. We then see the protagonist and Inori sneak in through the building's ventilation system like it's a stealth mission in a video game. Once they reach the room where the hostages are, they see soldiers brutally beating innocent civilians. These soldiers aren't even local, they're part of a foreign force, and are using the virus as an excuse to abuse and execute people without consequences. Just as Yan and his goons are about to execute the hostages, the rebellion launches a surprise attack, bombarding them with a storm of missiles. They distract Yan by making him chase a decoy truck, and at the same time, they ambush the military commander in charge of the operation, surrounding him with enough missiles to ruin his entire day. The commander, clearly not loving the situation, threatens to detonate atomic bombs hidden under the city unless he gets to speak directly with the leader of the rebellion. So Guy shows up for the chat. The commander demands their surrender and wants to know where the stolen key is. Guy naturally refuses. The commander responds by pointing hundreds of laser weapons at him because diplomacy is overrated. Meanwhile, the protagonist prepares for the next step of the plan. Using the power of the key again, he attacks Yan, drawing out Yan's inner weapon, which turns out to be a massive cannon. He fires it just as the commander attacks Guy, and the cannon creates a huge energy shield that reflects the lasers back, destroying the military's mechas and weapons in one go. Just like that, the military force is wiped out, and the hostages are saved. Afterward, Guy congratulates the protagonist for a job well done, and politely asks him to officially join the rebellion. The protagonist agrees without hesitation. The next day at school, he's sitting in class thinking about how happy he is to have saved Inori when the teacher announces a new student has arrived. It's Inori. The protagonist sees her and is completely speechless. Episode 3. The rest of the class reacts the same way. Since the girl turns out to be a super famous idol, they immediately start bombarding her with questions, to the point where the entire class is crowding around her except the protagonist, who's just sitting there, wondering what on earth she's doing there. Seeing the chaos, the protagonist's best friend Yahiro steps in and tells everyone to stop bothering her. Later, during gym class, one of the protagonist's classmates, who proudly claims to be Inori's #1 fan, comments on how amazing she looks in her PE uniform. The protagonist says she looks so perfect it's like she's not even real. The fan doesn't appreciate the honesty and insults him on the spot. After school, the protagonist returns home feeling pretty bad about all of it. Just as he's about to go inside, Inori shows up out of nowhere and opens the door herself like she owns the place. Naturally, the protagonist is stunned and starts asking her why she's there. She ignores him and walks in like nothing's happening, and as he follows her, he trips over her robot friend. When he finally catches up to her, she's already casually changing in the living room. He asks again what she's doing in his house, and she calmly explains that the rebellion told her to stay there, so now she's living with him. Meanwhile, somewhere far more stressful, the military's top brass is holding a serious meeting to figure out what to do about the rebellion. And surprise, the protagonist's mom, Haruka, is actually the assistant to one of the military leaders. They decide to send in a new squad of genetically enhanced soldiers to crush the resistance. Back at home, the protagonist is freaking out, unsure how to explain to his mom that a famous idol is now his roommate. Inori notices how worried he is and reassures him that she already knows his mom's schedule and has everything planned out. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. The protagonist opens it and finds Yahiro standing there. Yahiro says he noticed Shu looked upset after school, so he rented a movie and thought they could hang out to cheer him up. At that moment, Inori walks in and tells the protagonist she received an urgent message and needs him to come with her right away. Shu tells his friend they'll have to postpone movie night and promises to explain why a celebrity is currently living in his house. They go to meet with Guy, and the protagonist asks why he sent Inori to live with him. Guy says it's for protection, because during the battle, one of the hostages was a student from Shu's school. If that person saw him, there's a chance they could report him to the military. Guy gives them a new mission: figure out who that student was. Shu says his school has thousands of students, so it's basically impossible. But Guy tells him they can identify the person using the power of the key, since it lets Shu draw out people's inner abilities. Guy adds that he saw the inner powers of everyone present during the battle, so if Shu pulls out the wrong one, he'll know instantly. The next day, Shu and Inori come up with a plan to find out who it was, but when Shu tries to use the key's power on a girl, it doesn't work, and he accidentally ends up touching her chest. And of course, several classmates walk by at that exact moment and see everything, immediately turning him into the school's new favorite target for bullying. Later, Shu and Inori theorize why the key didn't work, and conclude that it requires direct eye contact to activate someone's inner power. This is bad news for Shu, who is painfully shy, but after some encouraging words from Inori, he decides to try again. The next day, he attempts it with a guy instead. This time, by maintaining eye contact, it works. He pulls out the guy's inner power, which materializes as a futuristic motorcycle. Cool, but unfortunately, not the person they're looking for. So they keep going, trying student after student, but have no luck finding the right one. Shu is exhausted, and Inori tells him they're looking for someone whose power materializes as a pair of scissors. She also explains that what appears from each person represents their fears and insecurities, and these objects are called voids. Shu then asks Inori why his void is a sword, but right before she answers, the girl he accidentally touched earlier appears, furious, and starts chasing him. Thankfully, Yahiro jumps in and helps them hide in the school gym. While talking to his friend, Shu starts to piece things together and realizes that Yahiro is the person they've been looking for, remembering that Yahiro has always had a fear of scissors. When Shu confronts him, Yahiro snaps and attacks him. Shu stops him by pulling out his void, which turns out to be a pair of giant scissor-shaped weapons. Inori immediately moves to eliminate Yahiro, saying that was her mission all along, but Shu stops her, saying he doesn't want to lose his best friend. Inori doesn't get it. Orders are orders, but Shu manages to calm her down and convinces Yahiro to keep everything a secret. Together, they report to Guy that the situation has been resolved. Later, Shu and Inori return home by train. On the way, Inori tells him she wants to keep living with him because she wants to learn more about friendship. Suddenly, the train stops in the middle of nowhere. In front of them, several armed soldiers appear. The doors open and, in a shocking twist, Yahiro pushes Shu out of the train and betrays him. Shu is arrested by the military. After that, Inori tries to stop the train to help the protagonist, but one of the rebellion's agents holds her back, saying Guy specifically ordered her not to get involved. So, next we see the protagonist in the back of a police truck being taken to a military-based prison. When he arrives, he's interrogated by a high-ranking officer named Makoto, who asks about his connection to Guy, since they were seen talking during the battle. The protagonist refuses to say anything, so Makoto decides to take him to another building to show him something. On the way, we see that the base's security has been beefed up due to a threat from Guy, who kindly let them know the rebellion would be coming to rescue their teammate. Makoto then explains what Yahiro was really doing during the battle and why he turned the protagonist in. Turns out Yahiro was dealing drugs to make money. And since there was a reward for turning in anyone connected to the rebellion, He took the opportunity. They arrive at a room full of patients infected with the apocalyptic virus. Among them is Yahiro's younger brother. The treatment to keep the virus under control is insanely expensive, so Yahiro was desperate to find a way to pay for it. Makoto also gives the protagonist more background on the virus that broke out 10 years ago, which led to widespread chaos and riots known as Lost Christmas. According to Makoto, the military stepped in, restored order, and kept the virus contained. All of this, of course, is supposed to convince the protagonist that the rebels are the real bad guys, but he's not buying it, because he's already seen how ruthless the military can be. Finally, Makoto reveals that the supposed upcoming attack by the rebellion is actually a mission to rescue one of their captured members. His name is Kenji, and he was arrested for a suspected terrorist act. Makoto hands the protagonist a transmitter, which he can use to secretly reveal his location when he meets up with Guy again. Oh, and if he refuses, they'll arrest Inori. No pressure. Meanwhile, Inori is feeling helpless for not being able to save the protagonist, and she's left wondering what she can do. In the next scene, the protagonist is taken to a room where he's supposed to meet with his lawyer, who turns out to be none other than Guy. With help from Tsugumi, a hacker from the rebellion, they shut down all the surveillance in the room. Guy tells him they're launching a rescue operation that very night and need his help. During the chaos, the protagonist has to find Kenji and use his void to escape. At first, the protagonist hesitates, but before he can even finish saying no, the rebellion's plan kicks off. A blackout hits the base, and explosions go off, causing the military to scramble and activate full lockdown mode. The rebels, however, keep hammering the place with wave after wave of missiles. While all this is happening, Guy keeps trying to convince the protagonist to follow through with the plan. Suddenly, Inori contacts them, saying she's coming to rescue him herself. Guy is furious, because that definitely wasn't part of the plan. The protagonist decides to escape and find her. On his way out, he's caught by a mecha and pinned down. Just in time, he's rescued by another mecha piloted by Ayase, the rebellion's expert mecha pilot. She's not thrilled to see him and scolds him for making Inori disobey Guy's orders. She even threatens to kill him herself if anything happens to her girl Gabby. Ignoring the death threat, the protagonist continues trying to escape the building. He eventually runs into Guy and the person they came to rescue. When he sees Kenji, he immediately jumps at him and uses the key's power to extract his void. It turns out to be a gravity-manipulating pistol. He uses it to take down one of the military's mechas with ease. Unfortunately, more enemy robots show up and surround them. Just then, Inori arrives, leaping toward the protagonist. Seeing her, he unleashes the full power of the weapon, creating a swarm of anti-gravity bubbles. He uses them to float toward Inori, grabs her, and pulls the massive sword from within her once again. With it, he absolutely obliterates the remaining military mechas in epic fashion. After the dust settles, they escape the facility together, along with Kenji. Outside, they meet up with Guy, who once again invites the protagonist to join the rebellion. And even though he still doesn't fully trust him, the protagonist agrees. We then cut to a scene of the protagonist heading to the rebellion's hideout. As he walks, he remembers what Makoto gave him, the pen he can use to alert the military once he's with Guy. The protagonist hesitates, unsure whether he should go through with it, still not certain if the rebellion's intentions are truly good. Later on, they arrive at a huge library, where we meet a new character named Shibungi, a high-ranking officer in the rebellion. He informs them that Inori and Kenji are both in stable condition, and upon hearing this, Guy decides to make an announcement. He tells the rebellion members that from now on, the protagonist is one of them and will be working at the heart of operations. Since he possesses the power of the key, he'll play a central role in their missions. He also announces that their next mission will take place in 3 days. He assigns Ayase the task of training the protagonist. The protagonist, seeing she uses a wheelchair, awkwardly says he feels bad for bothering someone in her condition. Without missing a beat, Ayase flips him to the ground like it's nothing, just to remind him she's more than capable, wheels or not. The protagonist immediately passes out from the impact and dreams of a strange little boy talking about jumping off a bridge. When he wakes up, his clothes are missing along with the pen Makoto gave him. Just as he realizes this, Ayase walks into the room and accidentally sees more of him than she wanted to. Naturally, she responds with a solid slap across the face. After that, the protagonist begins his training with Ayase. During one of the sessions, he notices that she's the one who has the pen. He politely asks for it back, but she refuses and tells him that if he manages to pass the rebellion's evaluation in 1 week, she'll return it. She then uses this opportunity to put him through a gauntlet of absurdly difficult training exercises. One of the tasks involves learning how to shoot a gun, and his instructor is none other than Inori. The protagonist is stunned by how skilled she is with firearms, which only makes things more awkward between them. After a very uncomfortable moment, Ayase casually calls the protagonist a pervert. Meanwhile, Makoto gives us a little villain monologue about an upcoming target, a weapon known as leukocyte, which will be the main focus of the rebellion's next mission. Back at the hideout, the protagonist is introduced to 2 more members. First, there's Arugo, an expert in hand-to-hand combat, and then there's Kyo, a girl who seems to be Guy's #1 fangirl. This surprises the protagonist, since having that much faith in someone is rare in a world like theirs. He even says Guy seems kind of selfish. Arugo quickly tells him that's not the case and that he just hasn't gotten to know Guy well enough yet. Later, the protagonist heads to his room and hears Inori singing a beautiful song. He decides to go see her and sits down for a chat. Not knowing how to start the conversation, he asks her why she joined the rebellion. Instead of answering, she flips the question and asks why he came to talk to her. He explains that he wanted to thank her for saving him and then asks her to leave the rebellion with him. She firmly refuses, saying it was thanks to Guy and the rebellion that she was saved in the first place. The protagonist responds by asking why she told him that she belonged to him. Inori confesses that it was something Guy told her to say. After that, she walks away, telling him not to get too close. He follows her and ends up seeing her enter a room with Guy. Naturally, he feels crushed, since he was genuinely falling for her. Humiliated, he runs off and accidentally bumps into Ayase. She scolds him for not watching where he's going, but quickly realizes from his expression what he must have seen. She tells him it's something that happens often, but everyone just pretends not to notice. The protagonist says it's not fair that Inori made him believe she cared. Ayase encourages him to give it his all during tomorrow's trial, telling him that once he passes, he'll learn the truth about many things because he'll officially become one of them. The next day, the protagonist takes on the trial, which involves reaching a target that's protected by Ayase in her mecha. To succeed, he'll have to defeat her. The test begins, and the protagonist is quickly chased down by the mecha as paint bullets rain down around him. At one point, he manages to dodge her and runs into Arugo. Seeing the opportunity, the protagonist uses the key's power to draw out Arugo's void, a wand that creates a force field. He uses it to immobilize Ayase's mecha. With the path clear, he rushes toward the target and completes the mission. Everyone in the rebellion claps and congratulates him. Just like that, he officially becomes a member of the rebellion, and Ayase returns the pen to him. Then, they receive bad news. Guy has been attacked by the military, who used the leukocyte weapon to completely wipe out an entire part of the city. We also find out that the leukocyte weapon is actually a massive satellite orbiting all of Japan, capable of firing absurdly powerful energy beams. You know, your classic overkill in space situation. Guy manages to contact the team, saying he's still alive, but the rest of the squad didn't make it. On top of that, all their supplies were destroyed too. With that tragic news out of the way, Guy decides it's time to plan a new attack against the military. Next, we see the rebels setting up camp in the ruins of the attack site. From there, they start strategizing how to raid the operations base that controls the leukocyte. The plan is to get to the weapon's power core, which is protected by a force field. Touch the field, and a lockdown protocol kicks in, disabling the weapon. That's why they need the protagonist's power, along with Kenji's gravity void. Guy also warns them this mission is a high-risk translation. Lots of people might not come back. Hearing that, the protagonist nobly offers to go solo, but the rest of the team immediately shuts him down. They've all chosen to fight too. Feeling slightly embarrassed and very rejected, the protagonist walks off to sulk in peace. He starts wondering if he should finally use the pen Makoto gave him to call the military. That's when Inori shows up and tells him she has a plan and he needs to follow her lead. Meanwhile, Makoto is chatting with the military commander. He reveals that they're already aware the rebels are planning to attack that same day. So naturally, Yan starts prepping for a big showdown. We cut to Guy, who's still trying to recover from his injuries. He starts questioning whether everything he's done has been worth it. Then we get a dark little reveal. Kyo, who had been with him during the leukocyte attack, ended up critically injured, and when it became clear she wouldn't survive, Guy decided to end her life himself. Yeah, it's that kind of anime. Unbeknownst to Guy, the protagonist is nearby and hears everything. Furious, he storms in and calls Guy a selfish coward who always lets others do the suffering for him, including Inori. Guy just laughs, which, as expected, only makes the protagonist even more furious. They start trading punches like it's a shonen showdown. After cooling off a bit, Guy explains that he never wanted to lead from above. He just wanted to give people hope. He's not a hero, just a guy trying to make the world suck a little less. Hearing that, the protagonist calms down and makes peace with him. Soon after, the rebel team launches their attack on the military base. Ayase and the others cause a major distraction, pulling soldiers and even Yan away from the main control center. That gives Inori, Guy, Kenji, and the protagonist enough time to infiltrate the base and reach the core. Just as they're about to use Kenji's gravity void to complete the plan, Yan shows up, of course, and starts shooting like a maniac. One of his shots hits the core, badly damaging it and knocking the satellite out of orbit. Now it's plummeting toward Tokyo at high speed. Not exactly ideal. The team scrambles to escape the base. Then Guy gets an idea and asks the protagonist for the pen Makoto gave him. Turns out Guy has known its true purpose all along. Right on cue, Makoto appears. Guy offers him a deal: save the city, and in return, wipe the protagonist's criminal record. Makoto, being a weasel but not a total monster, considers it. Guy explains the real plan to the protagonist. The pen doesn't transmit signals, it's actually a beacon. When activated, it tells a second leukocyte satellite to fire on its exact location. In other words, Guy plans to use the beacon to destroy the falling satellite by standing right underneath it. Which, as you might guess, is not the safest place to be. Guy volunteers himself to make the ultimate sacrifice. The protagonist, of course, feels completely powerless. He can't stop it. Then, someone who appears to be Inori shows up and offers her void to the protagonist, so he can destroy the satellite instead. Using her void, which manifests as a giant energy cannon, because why not, the protagonist fires a massive beam into the sky and blasts the falling satellite to smithereens. Crisis averted, for now. After that, Makoto keeps his promise and wipes the protagonist's criminal record, which means he finally gets to return to high school. Unfortunately, word travels fast, and his classmates aren't exactly throwing a welcome party. Most of them judge him pretty harshly for getting arrested by the military. That is, until Arisa, student council president and full-time queen of diplomacy, steps in to save the day. She convinces the whole class that the protagonist was just taken in for a routine questioning, nothing shady. Suddenly, everyone goes from giving him the cold shoulder to bombarding him with questions. The protagonist thanks Arisa for clearing the air, clearly grateful she saved him from total social annihilation. Later, he sits down with his friends to catch up on all the schoolwork he missed. That's when his close friend Haru tells him that ever since he got arrested, Yahiro hasn't shown up at school. This immediately raises a red flag, and he asks Inori if she knows anything about it. Inori shoots him a look and asks why he even cares after Yahiro literally betrayed him. Fair point. Just then, Haruka, aka Mom, walks through the door and is more than a little surprised to find Inori casually hanging out at home. The protagonist panics and starts explaining, but to his shock, Haruka doesn't make a fuss. Instead, she tells him to go out and buy some cake because they're having a proper dinner and she wants the full story. Meanwhile, Guy meets with his team. Shibungi gives him the bad news. Ever since the leukocyte attack, their supplies are running dangerously low. So Guy decides it's time to look for an ally. We cut to Arisa again, and plot twist, she's part of one of the city's most powerful and wealthy families. Her family is hosting a swanky party on a giant cruise ship, hoping to link up with a major NGO to make new political connections. Elsewhere, the military is planning to crash that party hard since any collaboration between Arisa's family and a rebel group could spell big trouble. Naturally, Guy and the protagonist sneak aboard the ship, planning to meet Arisa's father and convince him to support their cause. But once they're at the party, the protagonist spots his mom, cue internal screaming. He ducks and tries to avoid her, but then bumps straight into Arisa, who immediately recognizes him. She tries to talk to him, but Guy steps in and distracts her with his usual mix of charm and cryptic one-liners. It works. Meanwhile, the military gears up to launch missiles at the cruise ship. Back on board, the protagonist gets word from the rebel team that the ship is about to be turned into confetti. He rushes to tell Guy, who's in the middle of a tense conversation with Arisa's father. Together, they quickly hatch a plan. They'll use Arisa's void to stop the missiles. Guy smoothly tricks her into going outside, and once she's in position, the protagonist uses the key to draw out her void. Her void turns out to be a floating orb that generates energy shields. With it, the protagonist blocks all incoming missiles in a dazzling display of magical defense tech. Impressed by the whole dramatic spectacle, Arisa's father agrees to join forces with the rebellion. And here's the kicker. Guy was the one who secretly tipped off the military about the party in the first place. The whole missile stunt, stage managed for maximum drama. Classic Guy. Also, it turns out Guy might have caught feelings for Arisa, which certainly helped smooth things along. Later, we see a mysterious moment back at the protagonist's house. Haruka receives an envelope containing a photo. In it, we see a young Inori, a young Haruka, and a very small version of the protagonist. But strangely, he doesn't remember anything about it, and apparently, neither does Inori. After that, the protagonist gets ready for a school trip organized by the academy. When he tells his mom about it, she jokes that she doesn't want to be left alone and then casually suggests he should use the opportunity to visit his father. Of course, this school trip isn't just a trip, it's part of another one of Guy's plans. He sends the protagonist along with Inori and a few classmates so they can infiltrate a military base. They're all assigned to stay at a mansion provided by one of Guy's allies. Once they arrive, Suda, one of the protagonist's classmates and a key part of the mission thanks to his void, starts teasing him about Inori. He's found out they live together and immediately assumes they're a couple. Everyone's confused and the protagonist scrambles to explain the situation, but Suda cuts him off and suggests they all go to the beach instead, because of course he does. At the beach, the protagonist sets up an umbrella in the sand and quietly thinks about how annoying Suda is. Loud, nosy, and always saying something inappropriate, but then he spots Inori in a swimsuit and completely freezes. She looks stunning. And unfortunately, Haru notices how hard he's staring, Haru, who clearly has feelings for him. So she makes a bold move and invites him to go swimming, trying to grab his attention. Meanwhile, Shibungi and other rebel members are secretly keeping an eye on the group from a distance, making sure nothing goes wrong. Later on, the girls head back to the mansion, but notice that the protagonist and Suta are missing. Kanan tells them that the protagonist left early to take care of something. We then see Suda wandering around trying to take photos of the beach when a hat flies past him. It belongs to Ayase, who happens to be passing by with Tsugumi. Suda is totally mesmerized by Ayase's looks, thanks her, and the girls leave. Elsewhere, the protagonist is visiting a cemetery. Turns out his father is dead, and this was once the place he used to live. He lays some flowers on the grave, and right then, Guy appears. Guy starts talking about his father, explaining that he used to be a professor at a prestigious university and was one of the early scientists fighting the apocalypse virus. The protagonist admits he doesn't know much about his dad. He's always avoided asking Haruka about it to avoid upsetting her. All he knows is that his father died 10 years ago. On Christmas. Guy tells him he's there to explain the next part of the mission. He takes the protagonist to a cliff with a clear view of what looks like a hidden military base. Their goal is to infiltrate it and steal a mysterious stone linked to the apocalypse virus. The mission requires both the protagonist's power and Sauda's void. The protagonist isn't sure he can convince Sauda to help, so Guy tells him to use Inori as bait. Suda is a huge fan of her band. The protagonist clearly doesn't like this plan, but Guy insists it's necessary. Cut to the girls taking a bath together. Haru's thinking about how nice it is to spend time with the protagonist. When Inori walks in, the girls are surprised by how flawless her skin looks. Kanan gets a little too handsy, and Haru quietly burns with jealousy, wondering how the protagonist really feels about Inori. Back in the living room, Suda is talking with the protagonist, asking if he and Inori are actually a couple. The protagonist says no, and Suda immediately says he's going to try and ask her out. Seeing an opening, the protagonist decides to use this to his advantage and asks Inori to go on a walk with Suta to lure him near the mission site. Inori agrees. Later that night, we see the two walking under the stars. At one point, they sit down to rest, and Suda shows her a video he made just for her. The protagonist watches from behind a tree, and when Suda starts to confess his feelings, he gets irrationally jealous. In a moment of pure awkwardness, he jumps out, blurts something out, and pulls Suta's void. While half trying to confess to Inori, he accidentally triggers the whole operation. That's when the rest of the rebel squad comes out of hiding. They start laughing and scolding the protagonist for losing his cool and activating the void too soon. But since the cat's already out of the bag, they decide to launch the mission early. Using Suta's void, a special camera that can reveal secret entrances, they manage to get inside the base. Meanwhile, a mysterious man enters the facility too. He kills a guard and uses a keycard to sneak in, which triggers alarms and activates the base's security systems. Inside, the team makes their way through the traps and obstacles using the void. At the same time, the mystery man is also progressing, moving deeper into the base. Eventually, the rebels reach the room where the stone is supposed to be, but when they open it, the stone is gone. Guy is furious and orders everyone to retreat. We then find out that the man who got there first was Kato, a high-ranking military officer. After taking the stone, he visits the protagonist's father's grave to pay his respects. Later, Suta wakes up next to the protagonist and confronts him, saying he should have just told him he liked Inori. They argue a bit, but patch things up and agree to stay friends. And with that, the team wraps up the mission and heads back home on the ship. After that, we see Yahiro, who's on the run with his younger brother. They're hiding out in what looks like an old church, but their peace doesn't last long. Makoto and a squad of soldiers show up, forcing Yahiro to grab his brother and make a run for it. Later on, we cut to Kanon and Haru at school, wondering where Yahiro is. His disappearance was so sudden, and they haven't heard anything since. While playing a video game, the protagonist walks in and accidentally drops a teapot, startling Haru. She's been thinking about him a lot lately, and now she's a flustered mess. Kanon catches on immediately and decides to play wing woman. She asks the protagonist to go shopping with Haru for some supplies, obviously just a pretext to get them alone together. So they hop on the subway, heading toward the shopping area. On the way, Haru starts thinking about how she might confess her feelings, but suddenly, the train jolts to a stop and she falls forward, right onto the protagonist's chest. Completely embarrassed, she starts to work up the courage to tell him how she feels. And then, Yahiro bursts into the train. He's in a hoodie, clearly trying not to be recognized, and he trips as he runs in, spilling some medicine all over the floor. The protagonist and Haru are both stunned. The moment the protagonist recognizes him, he decides to confront him. Yahiro, ever the smartass, makes a joke about how close Haru and the protagonist are standing, which only makes things more awkward. The protagonist brushes it off and asks Haru to go do the shopping on her own. He has something to deal with. Yahiro leads him to his new hideout where his brother is resting. He tells the protagonist how they escaped after the attack on the military base, but what neither of them knows is that Makoto has been spying on them the whole time and is planning to make his move. Back in the hideout, Yahiro asks the protagonist if he could lend him some money, just enough to keep feeding his brother and stay in hiding. But instead of handing over cash, the protagonist calls Ayase and asks her to send a team to pick them up. Yahiro's surprised he's helping after everything that happened, but the protagonist says he's not doing it for Yahiro, he's doing it for Jun, his little brother. They get ready to leave, but just as they're about to go, Makoto's forces ambush them. The two try to escape, but the situation looks hopeless. With no other choice, the protagonist decides to use Yahiro's void, but when he tries to pull it out, Yahiro pushes him away and accuses him of being the one who ratted them out in the first place. That's when the protagonist snaps. He yells that he'd never do that the real traitor here is Yahiro. He reminds him he made a promise to get Jun out of there safely, and he still intends to keep it. Eventually, Yahiro gives in and allows the protagonist to use his void. But as soon as it's drawn, Jun, watching from the cot, thinks his brother's being attacked and falls off the bed. Right then, Yan arrives in his mecha and starts launching hooks that track void energy. The protagonist manages to destroy one of them, but Yan fires off a bunch more. One of them hits Jun directly. Everyone freezes. Makoto then points out something strange. Jun's illness is giving off the same energy as the voids. Suddenly, the virus inside Jun starts spreading right into Yan's mecha, corrupting the machine and even affecting Yan himself. The mecha goes berserk, turns on the other robots, and wipes them out. Then it starts moving toward the protagonist and Jun's body. The protagonist prepares for a fight, but the robot doesn't attack. Instead, it reaches out and gently lifts Yahiro's body. The protagonist jumps in to defend his friend, but just before anything happens, a strange portal appears, the same kind that opens whenever he pulls out a void. He's pulled into it. Inside, he finds himself in what looks like Jun's memories. The boy is there too. He shows the protagonist a moment from his childhood, back when things were still normal between him and Yahiro. Then Jun begs him to end it. The pain is unbearable, and he doesn't want to be a burden on his brother anymore. The protagonist, overwhelmed, agrees. The virus has already taken over. Back in the real world, the mecha writhes in agony and finally shuts down. Later, the protagonist walks out of the building, visibly shaken. Yahiro wakes up and asks what happened to Jun. The protagonist looks him in the eye and says simply, "He's dead. I killed him." We jump to the protagonist, who's currently on a mission with the rebellion. Guy gives the order. It's time to attack. The protagonist needs to use Inori's void, but as he reaches out to summon it, his mind flashes back to what happened with Yahiro and Jun. The trauma is still fresh. He freezes. No matter how hard he tries, he can't bring himself to do it. Instead, he panics and runs away, abandoning the mission and forcing the rebellion to retreat. Then we cut to a dream. There's a girl with pink hair who looks like Inori, standing in the middle of a fire. She asks the protagonist to promise her something, to make her sister happy, but just as quickly, he wakes up. It was all just a dream. He's hiding out again, in his usual secluded spot. When he checks his phone, he sees a bunch of missed calls and messages from the rebellion. Right on cue, Haru shows up with breakfast. She tries to talk to him, asks why he's been hiding, and why he won't go home. He dodges the questions. His phone rings. It's Inori, but he doesn't answer. Inori, clearly worried, reports back to Guy, but Guy's busy. He's in a meeting with Arisa's family, trying to gather intel on the stone they failed to recover. Mr. Okina informs him that the stone will be transported soon via military aircraft. Meanwhile, we find out that Kato is the one who handed the stone over to the military, and after that, he was arrested. The next day, the protagonist tries going back to school, but just seeing his classmates brings back too many memories. The trauma resurfaces and overwhelms him, so he bolts again and returns to his hideout. Ayase shows up and starts scolding him, trying to snap him out of it. She pushes him to get back on track, but Guy shows up and he's not playing nice. He tells Ayase it's pointless to reason with him. Then he straight up pulls a gun on the protagonist, threatening to kill him if he doesn't rejoin the mission to retrieve the stone. But the protagonist doesn't budge. He insists he never wanted this power, so Guy takes aim and pulls the trigger. But he doesn't actually shoot, just a scare tactic. When even that doesn't work, Guy and Ayase give up. Guy tells him he's officially out of the rebellion. The protagonist returns home, where Inori is waiting. He tries to apologize for ignoring her, but Inori quietly offers him a song she wrote to help him feel better. When she moves in to hand it over, he has another flashback. Without thinking, he slaps her hand away, destroying the song and calling her a monster. Inori starts crying. She says goodbye and leaves the house. Only after she's gone does the protagonist notice the onigiri she made for him, clumsily shaped, clearly made with care. That's when he breaks down and starts crying. Meanwhile, the military prepares to move the stone. Jan is the one assigned to handle it, and before the handoff, he runs into his father, the general, right as the elevator opens, and catches him making out with his secretary. Classic awkward moment. Back with the rebellion, they start planning their next move to intercept the stone mid-transport. Guy is getting medical treatment, and Inori, sitting nearby in another chamber, asks if he thinks she really is a monster. Guy tells her not to dwell on what the protagonist said. Then he asks her, almost teasingly, if maybe she's fallen for him. Inori starts to wonder if she has. Cut to Kato, who's now getting chewed out by the protagonist's mom for stealing the stone. In retaliation, or maybe as a warning, he tells her everything. The protagonist has the power of the key, he's tied to the rebellion, and she should seriously question whether Inori can be trusted. Back at the mission site, the rebels are already in place, making their move on the military transport plane. Meanwhile, the general carries the stone into a conference room. The rebels sneak their way toward the plane without being detected. But surprise, Makoto already knew this attack was coming. He has the military troops inject themselves with a vaccine, and just as the rebels bust into the cargo hold using an explosive, they find it empty. No pilotas, no cargo. A sign pops up. You fell into the trap. Makoto activates a device remotely. Turns out the real stone is in the conference room, and it begins to emit a strange purple energy. Cut back to the protagonist. He's with Haru now. He gets really close and asks if he can stay by her side. Then he says it. He knows she likes him. She slaps him across the face. Haru tears into him. She knows he's only using her as a replacement for Inori. And worse, she saw everything that happened with Yahiro and Jun. She tried to be there for him anyway, but all he's done is push her away. As she cries, he tries to apologize. But then everything changes. The sky starts to darken. The stone, it turns out, wasn't just a stone. It's a key, one that activates a nearby tower. That tower starts broadcasting waves that trigger infection in everyone nearby. People start collapsing. The virus spreads rapidly. Even Guy, who's still aboard the nearby aircraft, gets infected as he falls within the range of the tower. We learn this entire scheme was orchestrated by Kato, and he gave the order to Makoto. The rebellion is caught in chaos, trying to flee while being hunted down by the military. However, Guy is severely affected by the virus, and Inori tries to help him. Then we see the military commander, who is at the site where the key was activated. Everyone there begins to transform due to the virus. Suddenly, Yan arrives in his mech to save his father, but upon seeing him with his lover, he kills him. As a result, Kendo becomes the new general in command. Meanwhile, when a soldier attacks Makoto, the protagonist's mother takes the opportunity to escape. At the same time, Tsugumi contacts the protagonist and tells him that the whole plan has failed and that Guy and Inori are still at the airport. The protagonist then decides to ask his friends for help in order to save them, planning to use their voids for the mission. However, Yahiro protests, claiming that the protagonist is only treating them like tools. The rest of the friends ask what he means by tools, and this is when the protagonist explains the power of the key. He asks Hare for help, and with this, he draws out her void, a set of bandages that can heal any wound. He tells the group that he has used their voids before and apologizes for it. After explaining why he needs their help, everyone agrees to go with him. In the next scene, Kato uses the key to open a door and enters it with Makoto. Meanwhile, Guy and Inori, after finding Haruka, head to a tower that can broadcast a song that can help halt the virus. At the same time, the rest of the rebels try to hold off the military. Inori begins singing, and the virus starts to disappear from the people. Meanwhile, the protagonist and his friends arrive at the airport and come under attack. The protagonist uses Arisa's void to create a shield that protects their vehicle. After breaking through the first barricade, the military destroys part of the bridge, but with Hare's void, they manage to repair it and continue moving forward. After defeating a group of mechs, they finally arrive where Inori is located, but suddenly, Yan attacks from within a mech, causing their car to flip and trapping them. In that moment, Yahiro gives the protagonist his void, which he uses to defeat Yan and reach Inori. Just when it seems like they're safe, a portal opens behind Inori. From it emerges a blonde boy named Yu, who, it turns out, also possesses the key's power. He draws out Inori's void and attacks the protagonist. But Guy intervenes, placing himself in the path and taking the blow for him. At that moment, as Yu takes Inori, the apocalypse virus reactivates, and this time it's stronger than ever. Guy, barely holding on, orders the protagonist to follow Yu because Yu plans to sacrifice Inori to bring someone named Mana back to life. Just before the portal closes, the protagonist jumps in after him. As they travel through the strange space between worlds, Yu traps him in a trance, forcing him to relive memories he didn't even know he had. He sees himself as a child, standing on the beach with a girl, Mana, his sister. As they watch the sunset, a boy's body washes ashore. Mana rushes to save him, giving him CPR, and the boy turns out to be Guy. That summer, the three of them became inseparable. But for some reason, all of it was erased from the protagonist's memory. When he comes to, he finds himself in an ornate hall at the top of a grand staircase. That's when Kato appears. He begins to explain everything. Inori isn't just a girl, she's a body they created. A vessel, built to house Mana's soul. Now here's where everything changes. Mana was the first human to come into contact with the apocalyptic stone, and the first to be infected by the virus. But she wasn't just unlucky, she was chosen by an alien race that arrived on Earth a decade ago, bent on wiping out humanity with the virus and starting a new world. Mana had a role to play. She was meant to be the Eve of this new world, but for that she needed an Adam, so she chose her brother, the protagonist, because she had fallen deeply in love with him. But when he rejected her, everything unraveled. That's what triggered the first outbreak of the virus. And in the chaos, Mana's physical body was destroyed. Now Yu, an agent of that alien race, plans to use Inori to host Mana's soul, marry her, and finish what was started, the creation of a new species and the destruction of humanity. The protagonist tries to fight, but he's no match. Yu and Kato overpower him with ease. But just then, Ayase and Guy arrive. Turns out they made it onto the ship with help from Makoto, and Guy, though still injured, is alive. They jump into the fight, but Ayase is quickly defeated. Seeing no way out, Guy pushes the protagonist to remember the truth, the day the virus started, the day he rejected Mana, the pain, the shame, everything he forced himself to forget. And when those memories come flooding back, something inside him changes. The full power of the king awakens. Now, when he draws someone's void, they don't pass out. He uses it on Guy, who stays conscious, and hands him the weapon. Together, they charge forward to stop Yu and save Inori. As they fight through the crystal-covered chamber, they get close enough for Guy to trigger Inori's sword. The protagonist grabs it and uses it to free her body from the vessel containing Mana's soul. With Inori safe, Guy pushes forward, heading straight for the core where Mana's soul is held. But before he can reach it, crystal shards stab through his body, leaving him mortally wounded. The protagonist rushes to his side, but Guy stops him. Instead, he asks for one last favor. "Use the sword," he says. "End this." The protagonist hesitates, but Guy gives him one final push with his words. And with that, the protagonist thrusts the sword through Guy, destroying both him and the soul of Mana. The entire structure begins to collapse. The protagonist grabs Inori and they escape together. But as they flee, he breaks down in tears, mourning the loss of his friend. Guy is gone. After this, the entire area affected by the virus was put under quarantine by the military, and people are prohibited from leaving the area, which is why the students from the academy decided to stay in it, since most of them lived on the outskirts of the city. After this, we see Ayane, who is trying to pick up a shoe from the ground. But in trying, she ends up falling from her chair. At that moment, two guys arrive and offer to help her, and Ayase refuses since she doesn't like receiving help from people. The guys keep insisting and start harassing the girl. Just then, the protagonist and Inori were passing by, and upon seeing this, the protagonist jumps in to defend the girl. The bullies begin to intimidate the protagonist, but then Tsugumi appears and gives one of the guys a flying kick, which causes the guy to fall and take the protagonist down with him. And seeing that more people are watching, the bullies decide to just leave the place. Once again, the protagonist and the girls try to help Ayase, but she refuses and asks them to leave. On the way, Tsugumi tells the protagonist that Ayase has been very affected since Guy's death, and he tells us that after the battle, apparently the rebellion split up, and Inori, Ayase, and Tsugumi blended in among the students to stay in the shelter. And due to the lack of teachers at the academy, the president and the protagonist formed a group in which they are in charge of the shelter, and the students are a bit discouraged since there have been increasing acts of violence and vandalism. That's why Suda proposes holding a school festival to cheer everyone up. After talking, everyone comes to the conclusion that it's a good idea. Next, we see the protagonist talking to Yahiro, who shows him his void by giving it to him, and tells him that after the battle, he is able to pull them out without the person fainting. The protagonist also tells him that he hopes not to have to use the power of the key anymore, and Yahiro replies that he has to stay alert, since the military is still lurking. Next, the two go to where the preparations for the festival are taking place, and they run into Tsugumi, who will work at the themed cafe that her class is organizing. And after showing them Kanon, who has little dog ears, the protagonist goes to Inori, since she and Suda are preparing for a concert that Inori will give as the main event. After this, we see how Yoon infiltrates among the students in a uniform, and he runs into Tsugumi, who is carrying boxes full of costumes. The girl accidentally bumps into him, which makes Yoon start acting arrogantly with her, but Tsugumi forces him to carry the boxes, and then rewards him by giving him a caramel apple. Later, Yoon reports to Makoto that most of the rebellion members are at the school, and Makoto gives him the task of keeping an eye on them. Then, the day of the student festival finally arrives, and Tsugumi tries to make sure Ayase has a good time. And then, we are shown a group of bullies who began stealing since the quarantine started. These guys are furious because of the festival the academy students are holding, and just then, two other bullies arrive with an armored truck and a mech. These were provided by Makoto, with the intention that the bullies would attack the school. Back to Ayase and Tsugumi, the girls begin to argue because Tsugumi disconnected her from the mech when she was helping Guy. Ayase blames her, saying that maybe if she hadn't done that, Guy would have survived. After this fight, Tsugumi walks away, leaving Ayase alone. And that's when the protagonist arrives, who begins to encourage her a bit. But at that moment, the bullies start attacking the festival, shooting and destroying everything in their path. The protagonist immediately tries to get Ayase to safety, but the girl stops him and falls from her chair, so the protagonist runs to help her, and she tells him she wants to fight, and that even though she is disabled, she wants to be useful. That's when the protagonist's power activates, and he pulls out Ayase's void, which is a pair of robot legs, which allows her to fly and have great strength in them. With this, she manages to save Hare from being run over by the armored car. Then, she redirects it and makes it crash. The bullies are captured with help from the robot Tsugumi controls. Then, the protagonist pulls out Inori's void, and with Ayase's help, they also destroy the enemy mech, and so they manage to take down all the bullies. And after everything calms down, the students continue with the festival, leading up to Inori's concert. That's when Ayase thanks the protagonist for letting her fight with the void and says that thanks to that, she feels much better. But while they're talking, communications are restored and an official government announcement begins to broadcast on the screens. And it turns out that the one delivering the announcement is General Kato, who survived the attack on the tower. He informs all the students that a new containment measure has been approved by the government. And with it, they raise tall walls that completely close off central Tokyo, the place where the students are located and where the virus began to spread. After this, all the students are called to a meeting where they will decide how to handle the situation. But the students' fear causes a panic to break out, and they all begin to turn against Arisa. She tries to calm them down by saying that her father will help them get out of there. But the students no longer trust her. Because of this, they propose to elect a new president for the government. Shortly after, the representatives of the student government begin distributing vaccines for the virus to all the students. Yahiro comments that the president is still being attacked by many students on social media. Tsugumi adds that she also feels the president is not doing a good job as a leader. Hearing this, Suda stands up for the president, and he and Tsugumi end up arguing. Meanwhile, the bullies who had harassed Ayase are plotting their revenge. One of them reveals that he has gotten a firearm and will use it if necessary. Back with Tsugumi, she meets with Inori and asks if she feels lonely for not having parents. Inori replies that she has never felt that way, except for the one time she was separated from the protagonist. In turn, Inori asks the girl the same question, and we learn that Tsugumi has always grown up alone and is used to it, but she admits that she still misses the other members of the rebellion. Then the girl calls out to the protagonist, who was listening from behind a tree. At that moment, Tsugumi gives the protagonist a device she found after the fight with the thugs. The device can measure the void levels of people, and the group begins playing with it. While checking their powers, the protagonist uses it to measure Tsugumi's void. He mentions that he has never used her void before, and the girls tease her until the protagonist draws out her void. Meanwhile, in another scene, Kato meets with Makoto. He decides to set in motion a new plan to wipe out the members of the rebellion. To do this, he activates a new contingency measure that will reduce the quarantine area every day. Anyone found near the perimeter will be killed by new mechs designed by the military. With this, hundreds of people near the wall are killed, and the mechs slowly begin advancing toward the center. This news quickly reaches the students, and in addition, Makoto sends a message. He declares that those who turn in any members of the rebellion will be allowed to leave the quarantine area. The protagonist becomes deeply worried upon hearing this. But Hare reassures him, telling him that if anything happens, she will not hesitate to help him with her void. She also encourages him to run for president of the academy, making the protagonist consider if that might be a good idea. Shortly after, Tsugumi arrives, now recovered from the aftermath of using her void. While they are talking, the group notices some thugs harassing a girl. It turns out that members of the rebellion have a mark on their arm, and the thugs have started checking all the students for the mark. Realizing this, the protagonist becomes alarmed, knowing that Inori and Ayase are in danger. He goes to find her, but Inori has already defeated the boys trying to grab her. Soon after, Ayase is captured by the group of thugs that had been harassing her the day before. Tsugumi arrives to save her, but ends up being restrained by the students as well. Due to this situation, the president calls all students to a meeting in the academy's main hall. Arisa tries to calm the students down, saying that the rumor about the rebels is false. But the thugs step forward and claim it is true, saying they have captured some of the rebels. They present Ayase and Tsugumi as their hostages and try to expose them by showing the marks on their arms. The girls resist as long as they can, and the thugs end up pointing a gun at Tsugumi. Seeing this, the protagonist decides to protect his friends, steps in, and stops the thugs. The students obey him, having witnessed the incredible power he possesses. Then he confesses openly that he is a member of the rebellion, warning that if anyone touches his friends, they will have to deal with him. With that, he comes up with an idea to resolve the conflict. Afterward, it appears that the protagonist, Ayase, and Tsugumi are taken to the edge of the wall by one of the thugs and handed over to the military. The thug then demands to be set free, but instead the soldiers open fire on the protagonist and the girls, and then also shoot the thug. Shortly after, it is revealed that this was all a hologram broadcast by Tsugumi's tiny robot. This was the protagonist's plan, using Tsugumi's Void ability, which can create holographic clones of any person. He used those clones to show the students that the military would never honor their promise to release them if they gave up the rebels. Even after that, one of the thugs tries to attack the protagonist with a gun, but the protagonist uses the void of a boy nearby to strike him down. Seeing this, the protagonist tells his companions that they must have faith in one another and that he will protect them with his power. Yahiro then proposes that the protagonist run for president of the academy, and all the students enthusiastically accept the idea. With this, he becomes the new student president, and soon after, Yahiro suggests an idea for better controlling the students. To classify them based on the void level of their powers using the device Tsugumi had found. But this goes against the protagonist's way of thinking, as he tries to make sure everyone feels included. Although earlier they had been conducting exams to assess every student's void, the idea of ranking them goes against his values. He finds it too tyrannical. The protagonist wants to keep the students united. As the wall draws closer to the school, he has managed to maintain order and calm among the students. However, supplies and vaccines are growing increasingly scarce, and Yahiro points out that this is a strong reason to implement the classification plan, so that the strongest and hardest working can stay prepared to fight the military. The protagonist decides to ask the rest of his friends what to do, and Inori encourages him to do what he feels is best. After this, Ayase, Hare, and Tsugumi take a shower in the school's bathroom. Hare mentions to the others how unfair it is that the protagonist has to make such an important decision all by himself. Ayase reminds her that this is part of his role as president, and Tsugumi teases Hare, telling her she should hurry up and confess her love to the protagonist. Later, Suda goes to the protagonist to voice his discontent with the classification system they want to implement. The protagonist tells him that he doesn't like the idea either, and Suda encourages him not to accept this ranking of the students. After a fun scene where the boys shout out their thoughts, the protagonist goes to the rest of the council to share his decision. But he finds them in the middle of counting the virus vaccines, and they conclude that there aren't enough for all the students. Then Yahiro encourages the protagonist once more to classify the students. But the protagonist realizes that Suta is at the very bottom of the ranking, and after being cornered by his companions, he ends up accepting the classification method. While he's walking down the corridors, he encounters Suta and a group of students, the lowest in the rankings. They ask the protagonist to let them use their voids for practice so they can be of use to the academy. Meanwhile, Yun is shown talking with Makoto on the phone. Makoto mentions that the students are about to run out of supplies and will soon be pushed closer to the wall, so they must be ready. Yun replies that the kids are just students and that the military doesn't need to fear them too much, but Makoto scolds him for not shooting the supposed rebels that arrived at the wall the day before and threatens him, warning that if he doesn't obey, a rumor about it could quickly spread. After hanging up, we see Makoto playing a game of chess with Shibungi. In a change of scene, we return to the protagonist, hiding in the place he usually goes to. Hare arrives looking for him, and the protagonist tells her how sad he feels for not being able to fulfill his role as president and for failing to meet everyone's expectations. Seeing this, Hare embraces him to make him feel better and tells him that he must do what his heart tells him. Hare tries to confess her love to the protagonist, but she is interrupted by a call from Kanan, who tells the protagonist that Suta and a group of students have left the academy with their voids and are headed to a nearby hospital. The scene shifts, showing that the students' intention was to try to obtain vaccines from the hospital. The protagonist arrives to stop them, but the students complain and tell him to let them prove themselves, to show the academy that they can be truly useful. Suddenly, helicopters from the military arrive and start attacking them. The protagonist orders the students to hide in nearby buildings, but soon after, enemy mechs surround them. Then, the protagonist decides to distract the military so the students can escape and find cover. Hare begins to heal a girl who was injured. Upon seeing this, Suda asks Hare to fix a nearby car so they can use it to escape. But in doing so, he alerts the enemy mechs, which open fire and destroy the car. The protagonist notices and rushes to save Hare, and both of them are caught in the explosion. Meanwhile, Inori and the others arrive to help, dodging missiles and managing to get close enough to attack the helicopters. Hare, badly injured from the explosion, looks at the gravely wounded protagonist. With the last of her strength, she uses her void to heal him completely. But as she does this, a military helicopter spots her and fires, destroying her void. Even so, Hare manages to fully heal the protagonist, and with her final breath, she confesses her love for him before dying. The protagonist wakes up, realizes what has happened, and rushes to hold his friend. Hare turns to crystal in his arms and then disintegrates. This makes the protagonist scream out in grief, and also triggers a shift in him, putting him into a ruthless killer mode. He goes to Inori and demands her sword, using it to destroy the enemy mechs in an epic fashion. After this, Yahiro tells the rest of the group what happened and how Hare died. They try to calm the protagonist down, but he attacks Suda and blames him for Hare's death. Yahiro pulls him away and tries to settle him down, but the protagonist snaps, saying that Hare was the only one who truly believed in him. And with that, he decides it is time to separate the strong from the weak. Then, in a change of scene, we see Argo and Ogumo infiltrating the quarantine area from a helicopter. They were hired by Arisa's father, who plans to rescue her from that place and force her to marry a member of the government, someone who could help put an end to the quarantine area. Upon arriving, Argo encounters a group of the protagonist's students stealing medicine from students of another academy. Seeing the symbol of the rebellion on Argo's uniform, the students bring him to the protagonist. The protagonist has now become a tyrant and the king of the school, having classified all the students based on the strength of their voids. He is also recruiting students from other schools who have powerful voids, building an empire out of what used to be the academy. Argo arrives where the protagonist is, and the protagonist forces a girl to hand over her void so she can be classified. Argo tells him that he is there to take Ayase away. The protagonist decides to take Argo to a place he needed to visit, an abandoned ship that sank the day of the tragedy. The ship contains army supplies, which the protagonist has been collecting by using lower-ranked students. These students appear to be already infected with the apocalypse virus, but if they do their job well, they're rewarded with vaccines. All of a sudden, one of the oxygen pumps starts to fail. This pump is responsible for providing air to Suta, who is trapped in the depths of the ship. Seeing this, the protagonist decides that they will help him, and if he wants to make it out, he has to do it on his own. Argo refuses to stand by and do nothing, so he rushes to operate the emergency pump located nearby. The protagonist stops him, threatening him with a scythe. He tells Argo that they're planning an escape from the quarantine area, and for that, they need every resource available. If they waste them on lower-ranked people, it will ruin their plan. Argo criticizes him, saying this way of acting is too discriminatory, but the protagonist replies that due to the scarcity of supplies, acting this way is crucial. He also adds that he can't hand over Arisa, as she has a very powerful void and is needed for their escape. Then the protagonist threatens to kill Argo if he doesn't obey. When Argo refuses, the protagonist decides to imprison him instead. Shortly after, Suda manages to escape the ship on his own, and Argo is thrown into a cell. A robot belonging to Tsugumi arrives and explains to him what happened. How, after Hare's death, the protagonist built a kingdom based on voids, and how the people, out of fear, decided to obey him. In a new scene, we see Yu, who appears to still be alive, picking up the rings he intended to use to propose to Mana. Meanwhile, Commander Kato, who has been monitoring everything happening at the academy, informs Makoto and the protagonist's mother that things are going as planned, and that the protagonist has amassed many voids within the academy. Then the former president goes to speak with Argo, having heard that he was looking for her, but she is stopped by a student trying to harass her. Ayase intervenes, threatening him with a knife. After this, we shift to the protagonist, who is with Inori. Inori tries to comfort him, but she behaves in a strange way, as if she weren't herself. Suddenly, the protagonist is alerted by his companions that Argo has escaped from his cell. This was thanks to Tsugumi, who gave him the key and also subdued Ayase so she wouldn't alert the others. Argo tries to reach Arisa to escape with her, but he is stopped by the protagonist. The two of them begin fighting hand to hand, and Argo quickly manages to take down the protagonist. Then Yahiro appears and threatens Argo with a weapon, but suddenly some beams, dislodged by a void the protagonist used, fall on a girl. The protagonist leaps to save her, but this results in the girl's void being destroyed, causing her to crystallize and die. The protagonist then realizes that when a person's void is destroyed, the person dies along with it. Arisa, who was hiding nearby, witnesses this and escapes. The protagonist begins arguing with Yahiro, who tells him that Hair had died from a supposed genetic weapon. In reality, she died because her void was destroyed. Upon learning this, the protagonist understands just how dangerous the idea of a kingdom built upon voids truly is. Even so, Yahiro tells him that if this hadn't been done, everyone would be dead by now, and that they must stick to the plan to escape. Argo tries to reason with the protagonist, but the protagonist doesn't listen and attacks him to draw out his void. Meanwhile, the former president tries to hide from the protagonist and the others, but she is stopped by Inori, who acts in a very strange manner. Inori attacks her with a crystal spear. Shortly after, we also see Kato, who, along with the teacher, has managed to revive someone who appears to be Guy. After this, the protagonist goes to a watch post where some students aren't doing their job properly. Seeing this, he threatens to kill them by destroying their voids. Yahiro warns him that if he keeps acting this way, the students will grow to resent him. But the protagonist believes this is the only way to maintain discipline. Yahiro fears the students might ally with Ayase against the protagonist, while Inori has a flashback of what happened and how she is starting to lose control, doing things she doesn't want to do. Meanwhile, Arisa, still deeply traumatized by the attack, is in her room when she receives a phone call. She starts telling the person on the line about the situation at the school, but she's caught by the thug assigned to watch her. Arisa then begins flirting with him, manages to win him over, and makes him send a message to everyone, revealing what happens when a person's void is destroyed. This causes many students to turn against the protagonist, as they now feel he has been deceiving them all along. Then, in a change of scene, we see the leaders of the world's major powers meeting to discuss the threat Japan now poses to the rest of the world. They come to the conclusion that action must be taken. Shortly after, Yahiro goes to talk to Arisa, suspecting her as the one spreading the rumor. Arisa tells Yahiro he shouldn't trust the others, especially Inori, and goes on to recount the attack she suffered from her. Meanwhile, Inori is with the protagonist, and she tells him about the attack as well, how she feels she is starting to become someone she doesn't recognize. The protagonist promises that no matter what happens, he will always protect her. At that moment, Yahiro arrives and informs the protagonist about the attack Inori carried out, claiming she needs to be judged and punished. But the protagonist chooses to defend Inori and accuses Yahiro of lying to him about the voids. After threatening him with Inori's sword, he forces Yahiro to leave, then demotes him to the lowest rank. Later, we see Arisa with the thug, and it becomes clear she's rewarding him with sexual favors in exchange for information about the plan to escape the quarantine area. The thug gives her the date, time, and exact location of the escape. Arisa plans to use this information to remove the protagonist from power. The day of the escape arrives, and all the students move toward one of the walls. However, the students have started spreading the rumor of a coup. Meanwhile, Kato is closely monitoring the situation, planning to take action against the protagonist. The protagonist and the rest of the group arrive at the site of the attack, and quickly the military mechs start pursuing them. In response, the protagonist puts the attack into motion, and with Arisa's help, who appears to be working with the protagonist, they charge toward the machines. But the mechs open fire, killing several students instantly. This creates a distraction, allowing the protagonist, using Inori's void, to advance and destroy many of the mechs in a single blow. The plan is to reach a control tower that operates all the mechs in the area. The protagonist charges toward it, destroying several more mechs, and using the void of a girl who gives him a boost, he reaches the tower. He then uses a sword to destroy the control center, shutting down all the mechs and causing the tower to collapse, opening the way for the students. With that, they finally manage to escape the quarantine area. But this is when the former president's plan is set into motion. All the students point their weapons at the protagonist and separate Inori from him so she can't defend him. Then, Suda pushes the protagonist into a crater, and the students begin accusing him of using them as tools. Inori breaks free and rushes toward the protagonist, but suddenly she is run through by a void sword. At that moment, dozens of government mechs arrive, and it is revealed that the one responsible for this is none other than Guy, who has been resurrected by the military and is now a very different person. Guy approaches the shocked protagonist and, with a single strike, severs the protagonist's arm, the one that held the key's power. After that, Guy takes the power of the key from the protagonist, leaving him fallen and broken. After this, we see how the governments of the world decided to end the crisis by destroying Japan to eradicate the virus. They send fighter jets to Tokyo, intending to bomb the city with chemical weapons. Seeing this, Guy uses the king's power to unite all the students' voids and create a weapon, which he uses to neutralize the warheads. However, upon doing this, the weapon is destroyed, causing several students to die in the process. Ayase and the others try to reason with Guy, but he is no longer the person they once knew, and he threatens to kill them if they do not join him. Seeing this, Yan refuses to protect Guy and decides to help Tsugumi and the others escape. He destroys the nearby mechs and charges directly at Guy, but the boy is defeated by the other robots. Arisa then uses her void to protect Guy, and it is revealed that she was the one who leaked the information about where the students were going to launch their attack. Amid the distraction caused by Yan, Inori manages to escape with the protagonist. After that, Guy uses his power to destroy all the fleets from the world's nations and makes a global broadcast, threatening to obliterate any country that attacks Tokyo or even comes near it using the leukocyte satellites. Meanwhile, the military forms a special search team to locate Inori, as Yu plans to use her to bring Mana back and make her marry Guy. Inori goes into hiding, searching for supplies to survive. Later, Haruka confesses that she collaborated with the military to spare her son from further suffering due to the king's power. After this, Inori finds the protagonist and tries to feed him, but he is deeply disturbed by everything that has happened. Suddenly, a group of soldiers that includes Arisa finds the protagonist and Inori. As they are about to attack, a limousine arrives and armed men step out, opening fire on the truck. Arisa tries to stop them upon seeing that the person inside the car is her father. The old man steps out of the car and scolds Arisa for aiding Guy, telling her that the boy she fell in love with no longer exists. He also confronts the soldiers for pursuing the protagonist, but they inform him that their target is not him, but Inori. Upon hearing this, the old man attacks the soldiers, killing 2 of them with his katana. Then he turns on Arisa, claiming her actions have dishonored the family. However, before he can strike her down, she shoots him, killing him. Meanwhile, Inori tries to escape upon hearing that she is the target, but she is surrounded by a group of thugs who try to kidnap her. Inori loses control and kills them. After this, she goes to the protagonist and embraces him, but she loses control again and starts groping him. The protagonist shouts at her to stop and she returns to normal. Later, while Inori is eating, she has a vision of Mana. At this moment, we realize that it is Mana herself who has been causing Inori's strange behavior. Mana tells Inori that soon she will completely take over her body, and when that happens, the first thing she will do is kill the protagonist. Realizing this, Inori decides that the best thing she can do is to leave the protagonist. After offering him some words of encouragement, she puts him to sleep so he can't stop her and gives him a loving kiss before leaving. She then chooses to surrender to Arisa's military team, but she doesn't plan on going quietly. Inori activates her berserker mode and attacks the mechs. Meanwhile, she reflects that, despite being created only to be a vessel for Mana, her feelings for the protagonist are genuine, and she intends to protect him with her life. Suddenly, she is struck and captured by one of Guy's arrows, immobilizing her. When the protagonist wakes up and realizes Inori is gone, he resolves to do whatever it takes to get her back. Due to all the events involving Guy and the protagonist, Haruka decides to put an end to Kato's plans by destroying Mana. However, when she arrives where she is supposed to be, she finds that Mana is not there. Kato appears and tells her that she was never there. He also reveals that he was responsible for the death of the protagonist's father and then shoots Haruka. Later, we see Arisa patrolling the area with her squad when suddenly she is threatened from behind by the protagonist. he forces her to tell him where Inori has been taken. At that moment, an announcement is broadcast to all military units via Arisa's phone, alerting them that the protagonist's mother has escaped and stolen a briefcase containing a top security item. Because of this, the protagonist forces Arisa to take him to find her, in exchange for her telling him where Inori is. Meanwhile, Haruka arrives at Arisa's father's mansion, and, due to the old man's death, the person now in charge is a girl named Kurachi. Kurachi tells her about the old man's death, and Haruka explains how she managed to escape and tried to kill Mana to stop Kato's plans. This shocks Kurachi, as Mana used to be her daughter. Omogo then points out that this means the protagonist is also her brother. Haruka explains that the protagonist is not her biological son, but that she became his stepmother when she married his father. After he passed away soon after, she decided to raise Shu as if he were her own, although there was always a certain distance between them. Then Makoto, who decided to take on the mission to capture Haruka, manages to locate her. He arrives at the scene with a group of people, causing Kurachi's group to stand on alert. However, the people act as if they were only looking for vaccines for the virus. Upon hearing that they were supposedly harmless, the group lets down their guard and opens the door. Makoto and a couple of guards then open fire, shooting everyone present. Omogo manages to save Haruka and tells her and Kurachi to run. As the girls escape, Omogo attacks Makoto, who kills him easily with a knife. Even so, the girls manage to escape and, on their way out, decide to seek help from another group. Kurachi spots the briefcase and asks Haruka about it. Haruka reveals that she stole a void genome, the device that holds the king's power. After this, they arrive at Ayasi's group, and Argo tells the girls about Omogo's death. Later, Haruka and Ayase talk about the void genome, and Haruka explains that if used by an ordinary person, it can cause an allergic reaction and destroy them, so it must be used by the protagonist, as he has used it before, although this doesn't guarantee that he can tolerate it. Even so, Haruka doesn't want Shu to have to go through that again, but suddenly, the base is attacked by Makoto's mechs. Upon seeing this, the protagonist, who was on his way with Arisa, jumps out of the car to help his mother. Meanwhile, Haruka and the others try to escape, but with no way out, Ayase asks Haruka to use the genome on her so she can fight and stop the mechs. Just as she is about to administer it, Makoto appears and reveals his plan. He wants to obtain a void genome for himself, fascinated by its power. Ayase goes after the device when it falls down some stairs, and Makoto starts shooting, with her friends trying to cover her. After falling down the stairs, she reaches the device, but Makoto stops her again by hitting it, sending it flying until it lands right at the protagonist's feet. Upon seeing it, the protagonist picks it up. Everyone tries to stop him from using it, and his mother warns him that the genome could kill him. The protagonist replies that no one else should have to suffer from using this power. After telling Haruka that he loves her, he injects the void genome into himself and regains the king's power. Then he draws forth his own void, which manifests as a crystallized right arm with green veins running through it, replacing the arm he had lost. This new void can extract and assimilate other voids, as well as use them to their maximum potential. When he does this, the void turns black with a green outline, resembling the shape of his own. He then asks his friends for their voids and uses them to finish destroying the mechs. When Makoto tries to run Ayase over with a truck, the protagonist stops it using Suda's void and, with Yahiro's scissors, destroys Makoto for good. With this, he manages to save his friends, and thanks to his new void, he can also absorb the virus from people. This allows him to cure Suda's illness, and he resolves to use this new ability to put an end to the virus once and for all. Everything that has happened is reported to Guy by Kaido, but for him, the priority is now to focus on Mana's resurgence, as she increasingly takes over Inori's body, which is being held captive at the military base. Shortly after, Guy delivers a new message to the world, announcing to all nations that due to their repeated attacks in recent days, he has decided to put an end to mankind. He gives them the date when the attacks will begin. Meanwhile, the protagonist and the other rebels make a plan to stop Guy. It is then that Shibungi appears and explains Guy's plans to them, how he intends to spread the apocalypse virus across the world, wiping out all living beings. He also gives the protagonist a diary that Guy left for him. The diary belonged to the protagonist's father, and Guy decided to send it to him so he can understand the truth about his father. Meanwhile, as Kato talks with Guy, he recounts how he and the protagonist's father met. In college, Kato used to be very antisocial, until one day he met the protagonist's father, Kurosu, who was a huge admirer of Kato's research. They started working together and became close friends. However, one day, Kato accidentally discovered Kurosu with the woman who appeared to be the protagonist's real mother. When she became pregnant, the couple married and went to live where the Apocalypse meteorite had fallen. This meteorite was discovered by Mana, and Kato and Kurosu began to investigate it. One day, a being named Yu appeared before them, explaining his purpose on Earth, to wipe out humanity and create a new world with Mana. The protagonist's biological mother became infected by the Apocalypse virus during pregnancy, and Mana chose the protagonist as her partner to repopulate the world. Yu allowed her to live until she gave birth, after which she passed away. Following the death of his wife, Kurosu strongly opposed Yu's mission, leading Yu to try to convince Kato to join his cause. Kato eventually agreed and started working with him. After this, Kato and Yu began experimenting on children to find the ideal partner for Mana, and one of these children was Guy, who managed to escape by jumping into the sea. Later, he was found by Mana and the protagonist by the shore. In a shift of scene, we see the protagonist being examined by Haruka. As she does this, she remembers her past with the protagonist's father. They met when she joined Kurosu's research team, and as they spent more time working together, she fell in love with him, touched by his tireless dedication to studying the virus. Eventually, Haruka decided to marry Kurosu and went to tell Kato, her older brother, about her decision. However, he disapproved of the relationship, though she assured him she would marry Kurosu regardless. Everything was going well until the day the Apocalypse virus disaster occurred. Haruka was with Mana in a small church, waiting for Kurosu, while Kato had snuck into Kurosu's office to find his latest breakthroughs on the virus. He came across the diary explaining the discovery of the void genome and how it could stop the virus. At that moment, Kurosu arrived and the two argued. Kato tried to convince Kurosu to join him and Yu, but Kurosu refused, stating that he had no intention of sharing his discoveries with them. This enraged Kato, and after Kurosu refused again, Kato decided to kill him and steal his research. Right then, Haruka arrived, having gone to find Kurosu because he was taking too long. Upon entering, she witnessed her husband's murder. Meanwhile, Mana unleashed the Apocalypse virus disaster after being rejected by the protagonist. Back with the protagonist, the medical examinations have been completed. Haruka warns him that if he keeps absorbing the virus from others, he will eventually be consumed by it. She also tells him that it might already be too late to save Inori, as Mana is already inside her, and it's only a matter of time before she fully takes over her body. Even so, the protagonist tells Haruka that he doesn't intend to give up and will try to save Inori no matter what. His mother embraces him and weeps. Just then, someone arrives to inform him that the helicopter is about to take off. Before he leaves, the protagonist tries to return the voids he took from his friends, knowing that if he dies, they will die too, as their voids are linked to him. Yahiro refuses, telling him that everyone has decided he should fight using their voids. After an emotional moment with Suda, the protagonist departs for the mission to rescue Inori and stop Guy. After this, we see Guy being informed by his military staff that the United Nations has deployed an army to attack him. The protagonist and the others have joined this attack, and preparations begin to put an end to Guy. As everyone prepares for the battle, the protagonist encounters Ayase, who asks for help getting into her mech. The protagonist assists her and tells her she looks very beautiful. This makes Ayase blush, and she asks him if he would be able to kill Guy if he came face to face with him. The protagonist replies that he wouldn't hesitate for a second to do so, and he apologizes for having used her void to fight against him. She reassures him that it was her decision to give it to him, and that she hopes it will be very useful. Then, the attack on the military base begins. The combat helicopters launch hundreds of mechs. Upon seeing this, Guy uses the voids of Arisa and others, combining them to form a giant bow. He uses this weapon to shoot energy arrows, which strike and completely destroy several ships in the fleet. Meanwhile, the protagonist and the others have already infiltrated the military base. Yan appears, piloting a new modified mech, and attacks the protagonist's group, but it turns out to be an illusion created by Tsugumi's void. Meanwhile, the actual group led by the protagonist continues to advance covertly through the underground sections of the facility. At that moment, Tsugumi uses a program created by Haruka to hack and deactivate all the military mechs. As a result, the army ships mobilize to support the group on the ground, and the protagonist continues to move forward, using Suda's void to carve a path path until they reach a point where the group separates. The protagonist goes on alone to save Inori, who is about to have all her memories and emotions erased. Gei uses his powers to crystallize Inori, making mana emerge from that crystal. At that moment, Inori thanks him for having saved her that day when he rescued her from the laboratory where she was created. She tells him how happy it made her that she was able to meet the protagonist. Gei doesn't understand what she sees in Shu, and Inori explains that he showed her how beautiful and sad the world can be, and that despite all his struggles and failures, he revealed to her the true meaning of being human. Even though she was only meant to be a vessel for mana, she fell deeply in love with the protagonist. Meanwhile, the protagonist's team continues trying to advance towards Inori, but the military regains control of the base, slowing their progress. As this happens, Inori is finally consumed by the crystal, but before she loses consciousness, she begins singing the song she always used to sing for the protagonist. The protagonist hears it and finds where she is, and the entire group mobilizes to reach her. Upon arriving, they are stopped by Yu. When Argo sees him, he begins shooting at him, but Yu easily catches the bullets and sends them back. Then, he separates the protagonist from the rest of the group and begins to speak with him. Shu asks him who he is and what he wants. Yu explains that he is an envoy from an alien race and has come to create a new world. He then asks the protagonist if he is willing to unite with Mana to create a new race on Earth. The protagonist immediately replies no, and because of this, Yu decides to annihilate him. Using the genome power, he attacks the protagonist with the voids of his followers. The protagonist defends himself, dodging and counterattacking with Yahiro's void, while the rest of the group tries to advance to help him, only to be stopped by Yan. Yu continues attacking the protagonist, reproaching him for rejecting Mana when she had chosen him. The protagonist manages to land a blow that pushes Yu backward, and then creates a massive energy sphere with his void, launching it toward him. Yu tries to block it by merging the voids of all his followers, but it's too much, and he is defeated. The protagonist continues forward until he finally reaches Gei and Inori, but it is too late. Gei has completed the crystallization process, and Mana has been resurrected. At that moment, the apocalypse arrives in the world. Meanwhile, the resistance group continues trying to reach the protagonist. Ayase begins her battle against Yan and his modified mech. At the same time, Tsugumi struggles to regain control of the base, but is constantly stopped by Kenji, who has sided with the military. When Mana awakens, the first thing she does is run to embrace the protagonist. She then starts insulting Inori, saying that she has finally been freed from that monster. Upon hearing this, the protagonist becomes enraged, shoves Mana away, and yells that Inori is not a monster. Angered by Shu's rejection, Mana prepares to attack him, but Gei intervenes. He tells her that he will take care of the protagonist and uses his genome to draw out Mana's void. He uses it to manipulate the environment, and then Mana tells the protagonist that she will never forgive him for rejecting her and that he will pay dearly for it. She begins a ritual to generate a massive surge of energy that causes all the mechs to shut down. At the same time, she starts spreading energy rays across the world, infecting people with the apocalypse virus. Thousands of people turn to crystal and die. Gei tells the protagonist that this is the true apocalypse for humanity and attacks him with his sword. Shu, struggling, defends himself with the help of his powers. Meanwhile, Ayase and the others are mercilessly attacked by Yan. Argo uses a machine gun to give Ayase a chance to escape, and because Yan's mech is powered by a void, it becomes infected by the apocalypse virus. The protagonist continues fighting Gei, trying to make him come to his senses, but Gei, no longer himself, criticizes the protagonist for rejecting Mana and wounds him with his sword. Elsewhere, Haruka arrives where Kato is and threatens him with a gun. Meanwhile, Gei is about to kill the protagonist, and the protagonist is ready to give up, when suddenly he hears Inori's voice. The voice emanates from a crystal rose she left before dying, and she encourages him to keep fighting, telling him that she believes in him completely. The flower of Inori connects with the protagonist, releasing a surge of energy that stops Mana's attack. It also disables Yan's mech, halting the assault on the rebels. Meanwhile, Shibungi finds Kenji's hiding spot and kills him, allowing Tsugumi to regain control of the base. The protagonist then summons Inori's sword, releasing its full power, and begins the final battle with Gei. While this is happening, Ayase manages to take control of her mech and, with Tsugumi's help, attacks Yan with all their strength, defeating him. The protagonist charges his sword with all the combined power of himself and Inori, delivering a final blow that defeats Guy. Guy then transports him inward to a space where the true Guy appears. Guy describes this place as where Mana is chosen, a utopia created by you. Here, Guy confesses to the protagonist that he had always been in love with Mana, and before disappearing, he begs the protagonist to save Inori and free Mana from Yu's control. He then bestows upon the protagonist his void genome. Returning to the scene, the protagonist finds Inori, who has managed to control Mana, but she is severely weakened by the apocalypse virus. It is then that the protagonist makes a decision. By merging both genomes, he begins to absorb all of the apocalypse virus from every person, as well as all of their voids. His companions realize this, and as the building starts to collapse, they have no choice but to escape. Jan's assistant manages to save him before he is captured by the army. The protagonist continues to absorb the apocalypse virus until he is completely crystallized along with Inori, but suddenly, he has a vision where he sees Inori. She gives him a red thread that she used to play with him. Upon taking it, the crystal around him shatters, freeing him, but this causes Inori to disappear. The entire building collapses, and it appears as if the protagonist has died as well. Meanwhile, his friends grieve outside the building, blaming themselves for not having been able to help him. 5 years later, the story picks up with the protagonist's friends gathering for dinner. To their surprise, the protagonist arrives as well. He is alive. He managed to survive, although he has gone blind. The final scene shows him sitting on a bench, listening to the songs that Inori used to sing. This is how the anime Guilty Crown ends.